Welcome to the ROTC and Academy Insiders, where we break down the commissioning paths for students and families who are navigating the intense, complex process of becoming a military officer. I'm your host, Lieutenant Colonel Kirkland. I'm here with Trish, Dach. Trish?
Hey, sir. I am excited to zero in on the Army ROTC pathway today and specifically talk a little bit about how it feeds in with active duty and reserve components with the National Guard and the Army Reserves.
I spent 6 years as a professor of military science in 2 different programs, and I had cadets who went into the reserve component after commissioning from our Army ROTC, and have seen that a lot in my time. I can give perspective here that can hopefully clarify this for people who don't really realize this part of Army ROTC. Army ROTC is unique if we compare it, like, say, to Navy ROTC or Air Force ROTC. When most people think of ROTC, they assume that they're going to go straight on to active duty. For example, in Navy ROTC, if you win a scholarship, you're committing to active duty. There's really no guard or reserve option, meaning part-timers, either in the reserve component or like in the state National Guard, basically 1 weekend a month and then 2 weeks sometime during the year where you drill. In the Air Force, it's technically possible to go into the reserve component, but it's very, very limited. A few cadets, mostly pilots who can't get a training slot, might go into the Guard or Reserve, but the Air Force typically commissions all of its ROTC graduates active duty. For the service academies, all cadets or midshipmen who go to service academies go on active duties. What we're talking about here specifically is Army ROTC, right? At about 270 some odd host programs and even more affiliates that are associated with the host programs nationwide that typically commission upwards of 6,500 cadets a year. The Army ROTC has a large Guard and Reserve mission to fill, and ROTC is a major pipeline. Now, the Guard can also commission officer candidate school, but for the most part, State Guard and Army Reserve relies on Army ROTC to supply its officers, and the Army's is by far the biggest branch of service and has a significant mission for the Guard and Reserve. Depending on the year and the Army's needs, about 40% of ROTC commissions will either go into the Guard or Army Reserve. For many cadets, this isn't a fallback. It's a strategic choice that they make to go into the Guard and Reserves. The question is, why would somebody go into the Guard and Reserve versus active duty? Well, there could be a number of reasons. Let me give you one example. I had a candidate that I worked with about 4 years ago whose dad ran a business and his son was applying for Army ROTC, but he was very, very important in helping his dad with his business. And the idea of him going on active duty and going somewhere for 4 years to serve his active duty commission was not something that the family could afford to do. The father was very, very pleased that he could go and do ROTC at a college or university and then stay in his local area and do the Army National Guard in his state and continue to help his dad during the day with his business and then do his drill on the weekends and maybe do 2 weeks sometime during the year. So for that family, having that ability to be able to go Guard and Reserve is a very strategic choice for someone like that. Not everybody has to go on active duty.
A really interesting point too with why someone wouldn't want to go active duty, because it seems like there are a lot of different situations and a lot of times we just make the assumption that everyone wants to go active duty, but it doesn't fit everyone. Across all 3 components, there's about 18% officers from when you look at the enlisted officer side of the house. And so active duty has about 87,000 officers. Army National Guard is about 60,000 and Army Reserves has about 34,000 officers. So that's a pretty significant amount. But when you add Army and National Guard and Reserve together, it's just slightly greater than active duty. So it's split 50-50 more or less.
Right. And so if you look at the numbers, now we're talking about fiscal year 2023, a couple of years ago, is that for that year for Army ROTC, 6,400 second lieutenants were commissioned through Army ROTC. Of those, 3,400 competed for active duty, wanted active duty, and then 3,000 cadets opted into the Guard or Reserve from the beginning. So you had about a little bit less than half of the lieutenants that wanted to be commissioned wanted to go into the Guard and Reserve versus active duty. So ultimately, about 3,100 cadets were selected for active duty. That means about 300 cadets who wanted active duty didn't get it, meaning they were forced branched into the Guard and Reserve. So what that tells us is that not everybody gets active duty, but a substantial number of cadets who want to serve part-time, especially those pursuing civilian careers, law school, or graduate school while serving their country, may want to go into the Guard and Reserve rather than go on active duty. But ultimately, there may be some cadets that may not get active duty. And then for fiscal year 2023, it was about 300 of those cadets. Almost 3,000 cadets actually wanted to go into the Guard and Reserve, or a little bit less than half.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And I mean, when you look at like the Army Reserve, there's 34,000 total officers. So that means that every year, 10% are being replaced or added to the total number, which is interesting when you think about it from the second lieutenant perspective. But sir, how do you compete for active duty? How does that work out?
Army ROTC has its own order of merit. So that order of merit is used, first of all, to determine the cut line for active duty. In fiscal year 2023, that were the 300 that got cut from active duty and were forced into the Guard and Reserve had a lower order of merit. And so they got cut at a certain point, and then they were forced to go into the Guard and Reserve. So the order of merit first determines if you make the cut for active duty. And then second is it determines sort of what branch specialty you want to go into. So we're not going to talk about branch specialties today, but obviously the higher in your order of merit, the better chance you have of getting the branch specialty that you want to get. The order of merit is based on a scoring system across 3 brackets. There's what's called academic outcomes, which is 50% overall, leadership outcomes at about 35%, and physical fitness outcomes at 15%. So the academic outcomes is mostly your cumulative GPA. It's like 80% of that. And then the rest of it is your ROTC GPA that you got for your ROTC classes. And then they give you some extra points for strategic language proficiency. I think they also give you a little bit if you're taking a STEM major, but about half of the order of merit is pretty much your cumulative GPA, whatever your major is. So for those who got forced to go into the Guard and Reserve, generally they're looking at below 3.0. The average GPA for an Army ROTC cadet is somewhere around 3.2, 3.3. So if you're in the 2.5, 2.6, 2.7 GPA and you want to go active duty, you may be at risk for being forced into the Guard and Reserve if you have a lower GPA. Another 35% is leadership outcomes. So that's your performance at summer camp, which is called advanced camp at Fort Knox in Kentucky. That's between your junior and senior year, or what we call between your MS3 and your MS4 year. So your performance there, and then the evaluation report that your professor of military science gives you on campus, ranking you compared to the other cadets in the program. And then any sort of additional leadership roles that you have on campus or in the community that add to that leadership outcomes profile. And then the final 15% is your Army Combat Fitness Test for record, which is conducted in your MS3 year, and then any athletic participation that you have outside of the Army Combat Fitness Test, which would be like varsity sports, club, intramurals, and things like that. So that's all rolled up together. And then they actually rank people, Trish, all the way from 1 all the way to 6,400. If you follow Army ROTC on Facebook, they'll announce the top 10 cadets out of the 6,400 cadets. And I think at the top 10% of those 6,400 are considered DMGs, or distinguished military graduates. What should strike you first is that getting your highest GPA you possibly can is the number one. They're being able to, first of all, get active duty and not be one of those 300 people who get forced into the Guard and Reserve. And second is if you want to get a popular branch in the Army, such as aviation, military intelligence, those are 2 oftentimes popular branches in the Army. You obviously got to do well on your GPA and then perform well on campus, get a good evaluation report from your professor of military science, and perform well at advanced camp at Fort Knox in Kentucky.
We always talk about scholar athlete leader profile. And I love that the Army continues to emphasize those 3 tenets even like throughout ROTC, because your entire military career, you should be a scholar, an athlete, and a leader. So I love that it's so concrete and that students can know exactly what they need to be successful, to branch what they want, to commission active duty. I love how clear it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And how the order of merit is calculated. There are sometimes little tweaks here and there, but it changes each year a little bit, but generally it's held to about the same OML, and OML that is operative today here in 2025 is very, very similar to the one that when I was professor of military science up to 2013. So not many changes there. It works and it's effective, but there is an exception to going on active duty, Trish. You want to know what that exception is?
Tell me, sir.
Okay. Senior military college exceptions from the government says that if you attend one of the senior military colleges, and there are 6 senior military colleges, the Citadel, Norwich University, Texas A&M, University of North Georgia, Virginia Military Institute, and Virginia Tech, you attend one of those schools and you are recommended by your professor of military science, you are guaranteed an active duty commission if you want it. So you could have a 2.0 GPA and barely passing at advanced camp, be the last person rated at your senior military college. And as long as the professor of military science thinks you're worthy, then you can go on active duty.
That's a big asterisk there, though. As long as your PMS likes you.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have really, even if you have a 2.0, you have to have shown your PMS that you're worthy of going on active duty.
Absolutely. But it's nice to know you've got that backup, that if you're not doing that well academically or you don't do that well at camp, you can still get active duty. So going to a senior military college is like being what we call at West Point, the go to the class, which is the last person of the class, the lowest ranking cadet, and the highest ranking cadet at West Point are still active duty second lieutenants. So it's similar if you go to like the Citadel or Norwich. So for the most part, when I work with candidates who are great high school students that are getting 1,400 SAT scores, that are going to be doing Army ROTC and majoring in a subject that they love, generally they're going to be getting a 3.5, 3.6, 3.7. So they're not having to worry about active duty. But if you're a marginal performer and you're getting crushed in college, maybe going to a senior military college might be something you may consider, above and beyond, of course, all the other great things that you can do at a senior military college, getting that experience there with a military environment.
Question for you, sir. So for fiscal year 23, we had 3,400 compete for active duty and 3,100 selected for active duty. So about 10% did not get selected. Would you say that is on par for each year? About 10% do not get selected and instead go to National Guard or Reserve?
Yeah, I'd say that's about right. That can vary up or down in certain years. I know that this year, meaning the 2024-25, I think there might have been more who were forced into the Guard or Reserve, but it holds in about that amount.
That's pretty good odds.
Yeah, it is. I had some really, really great cadets in my program who decided to opt for the Guard and Reserve for a myriad of reasons. One example I discussed was this father-son business that had to be run, but there's many different reasons why you do that. And I remember one cadet I had back in 2010, 11, who I think he was a DMG, and he was probably ranked in the top 100 cadets in the country, and decided to go Guard and Reserve. It's not like you've got great officers going in the Guard and Reserve. You got great officers going on active duty from Army ROTC. So everybody has their own reasons for going on active duty or the Guard or Reserve. It's a great option. I'd say that I would caveat it a little bit by saying you go on active duty, you serve full-time for 4 years, and then you go 4 years in what we call the individual ready reserve, meaning that you don't have to drill and you just serve out your remainder of your 8-year commitment. For the Guard and Reserve, it's 8 years in the Guard or Reserve. So that's something you have to consider, that you're going to be doing it part-time longer than just, I want to say getting it out of the way, but having that 4-year active duty commitment.
What are your options if you decide you want to go Guard and Reserve? What does that look like from the beginning?
And let's say you want to go into the Guard and Reserve. I want to split it up into 2 things here. First is you want to go into the Guard and Reserve and you want a scholarship to go into the Guard and Reserve. So there's these scholarships called Minuteman scholarships or GRFD scholarships. And so these are very similar to the high school scholarships that you compete for, that high schoolers would compete for on their senior year that we help candidates with, that gives them the option going into the Guard or Reserve or active duty when they use that scholarship. What we're talking about here is a specific scholarship called the Minuteman Scholarship, or the GRFD, Guaranteed Reserve Forces Duty Scholarship, that pays up to 4 years tuition, full tuition in a public or private college or university, $1,200 a year for books, and $424 a month stipend. Now, that comes with a contractual obligation to commission into the Guard and Reserve, so there's no active duty option. The reason is this scholarship is funded by the Guard Bureau or the Army Reserve, because it's their money. They're holding you to Guard and Reserve. So you want to go into this with your eyes wide open regarding that, because I've seen examples of cadets that took this Minuteman scholarship, maybe because they didn't get the scholarship off of the high school board. They get this scholarship and then they get to their senior year and they want to go on active duty, and that's closed down to them because the Guard and Reserve has been funding their scholarship. So you got to make sure you go into that with your eyes wide open. The other thing that's interesting about the Minuteman scholarship or the GRFD scholarship is that you have to drill with a unit. So there's like local reserve unit or a local Guard unit. And what you're doing is you're drilling there 1 week in a month and then 2 weeks over the summer. You get E5 pay, which is sergeant's pay for the Army. And so you get some additional pay, but you have that 1 week in a month obligation where you drill as a Guaranteed Reserve Forces scholarship recipient, where you're being a lieutenant trainee in the unit. Remember that this scholarship isn't awarded through the national process that we help candidates through the high school process, but you work directly with your local ROTC program, mainly your ROTC program, because they have Guard and Reserve representatives in every ROTC program that can help you navigate this Minuteman scholarship.
Interesting, sir. And then I've also heard about the Simultaneous membership program. What does that entail?
Yeah, so this is called SMP. Now, the difference with SMP is that you can actually keep your options on going on active duty. This SMP program is not one that will pay your full tuition at a college or university. It won't pay for you at, say, Notre Dame or Duke or USC, pay for the full tuition. What you do is in your sophomore year, your what we call your MS2 year in ROTC, you can sign what we call an SMP contract. And it's a ROTC SMP contract, or Simultaneous Membership Program contract. And what it means is you drill with a Guard and Reserve unit as a cadet while you're still in ROTC. You have to drill 1 weekend a month, and then over the summer for usually 2 weeks while you're there. And you still have the option to go active duty instead of signing that Minuteman or GRFD contract. Can get federal tuition assistance of up to $4,500 a year. And because you signed the contract, your MS2 year, you start drawing the ROTC monthly stipend of $424 a month. And then you may be considered also for in-state tuition in certain states for state schools. States like Arkansas, Texas, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, North Dakota offer their cadets in-state tuition if you're under an ROTC contract. And then others like Illinois and Maryland will do that on more of a case-by-case basis. So this can be leveraged very well, particularly if you're going to an in-state school or you're considered an in-state student. You get that $4,500 a year, you get the E5 sergeant's pay, and then the stipend, and that can really help offset your tuition right at these state schools if you play your cards right. That's really what we call the SMP program that's unique to Army ROTC.
Fascinating, and just really good education for people out there, what option they want to pursue if they're considering Army ROTC. So all my high schoolers, no matter where you are, time to start thinking about how you'd utilize these two programs should you desire to go Guard or Reserve.
Here's really the big picture is that this past year, meaning the 2024-25 applicant pool, Army ROTC scholarships dropped 40% this year. There was a big drop in ROTC scholarships. So people who would normally have, like, say, a 1000 essay or 1100 SAT score might have gotten a 3-year advanced designee scholarship for Army ROTC. Well, this year, they likely weren't going to get that scholarship. We have a number of candidates who might have gotten a scholarship that didn't get one this year. they're going into these colleges and universities with no scholarship. That means you really got to be strategic about how you're going to pay for college and become an officer. If you know you want to go into the Guard and Reserve, you can engage with that Minuteman or GRFD scholarship. Or if you know you still want to go active duty, what you can do is your freshman year, you figure out a way to get through your freshman year, and then you sign that simultaneous membership program contract your sophomore year. Be strategic in the state that you choose to do your ROTC at your state school. That can really reduce your tuition, make you an in-state student, and then would give you the tuition assistance in order to pay for your schooling. Because of the decrease in the scholarships, you need to be more strategic, and you need to think about whether or not the Guard and Reserve path is something that you like to take. And then also realize that the SMP can be a big force multiplier, particularly if you go to a state school and you take a look at how much the in-state tuition is going to cost.
This would be really helpful for students interested in law school, medical school, cybersecurity, politics, entrepreneurship, because Guard and Reserve lets you do both. You can pursue both your passion and serve as an officer.
Absolutely. So here's the summary. Army ROTC is the only branch where Reserve and Guard is planned, strategic, and a respected option. That option is only through Army ROTC and not any other path. And about a third of ROTC cadets, even more than that, actually take that path. A half, maybe a little bit less. It's a path that is respected, is one that gives you viable route to take. Active duty is not the only way to serve. There's many different pathways that you can take in the Army. The Minuteman Scholarship, it's important that this locks you into the Guard and Reserve Commission when you take that tuition. If you're not sure you want to go on active duty or the Guard and Reserve, you want to think twice about that Minuteman or GRFD scholarship, because you may go further into programs. You learn more about the Army. You get to junior or senior year and you say, I'd really like to go active duty and do this full time. Unfortunately, you're going to be locked into the Guard and Reserve. And that can be devastating if that's not something that you want to do. And then the SMP program helps you earn money. $4,500 a year may get you in-state tuition, gets you that E5 pay and experience in a Guard or Reserve unit, but it keeps your ability to keep active duty open. So that can be a really beneficial experience in a number of ways that allows you to decide to go Guard or Reserve or go active duty. With this knowledge, you can customize your path to pursue your goals, both as an ROTC cadet when you go and become an Army officer, and then eventually when you decide to leave service in the end. Any other thoughts about Army ROTC and Guard and Reserve?
I've seen some fantastic students go into Army ROTC, and I think that no matter which path you choose, active duty or Guard and Reserve, I just want to thank all of our listeners for wanting to serve our nation as Army officers. It's very admirable, and we need more young men and women across the nation who are willing to do so. Thanks for your interest.
All right. We'll see you next time.